She told me to find someone my own age. But how do you walk away from the one person who makes the world feel quiet? It was one of those late afternoons where the sun slants in just right, warm and honey-colored, cutting across the kitchen in thin golden ribbons. I had been here countless times before, sitting on that same wooden stool while my friend ran upstairs to grab something, but today felt different. Or maybe I was different. She stood by the counter, sleeves lightly rolled up, a soft cinnamon scent filling the room as she stirred something in a mug. Her movements weren't rushed. Everything she did had this quiet rhythm to it, as if even the smallest gesture deserved her attention. The spoon clinked gently against porcelain, the kind of small sound that shouldn't draw notice but somehow did. I caught myself watching her. Not staring, just observing in that way you do when a moment suddenly slows down, and you realize you've never truly seen something that's been in front of you all along. Her hair was tucked behind one ear, a few strands catching the light. The faintest crease of a smile touched her lips as she tasted her tea. There was nothing staged about her, no deliberate attempt to be impressive, and that, maybe, was what unsettled me most. She glanced at me then, eyebrows raised as if to ask why I was so quiet. I shrugged, said something about the smell of her baking. She chuckled, a low, warm sound that filled the space between us. "It's just cinnamon rolls," she said, waving it off like it was nothing. But the way the scent lingered, sweet and sharp at once, made it feel like more. I thought back to when I first met her years ago. She had always been kind, polite, welcoming in that effortless way mothers often are to their kids' friends. Back then, she was just Mrs. Adele. A background presence of hospitality and polite smiles. But now, at 24, with her somewhere in her early 40s, she didn't feel like a background presence anymore. She felt real. Someone with her own world, her own calm gravity. When my friend finally clattered back down the stairs, the moment dissolved like steam off the mug. The kitchen became just a kitchen again. She wiped her hands on a towel, asked if we'd be staying for dinner. Her voice was the same, her expression the same, but for me, something had shifted. As we left, I caught a glimpse of her in the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame, a faint smile that seemed to linger a heartbeat too long before she turned away. It wasn't anything. Not yet. But it was the first time I wondered if maybe the quietest people in your life are the ones who change you the most, not through grand gestures, but through the weight of their presence. The rain started not long after we left the store, soft at first, then steady, streaking the windshield in ribbons of silver. She had offered to drive me home after I helped her with a few errands. My friend had stayed behind, saying he'd catch up later. It wasn't unusual. I'd been in her car before, but the quiet felt different this time, thickened by the sound of rain and the soft hum of the heater. She drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes focused but calm, a faint crease between her brows. Street lights flashed over her face, light, shadow, light again, and I found myself studying the way she concentrated when the world slowed down like this. Her perfume was faint, something floral but mature, not loud, just enough to catch in the warm air. "You've been quiet today," she said finally, not accusing, just noticing. "Just tired," I lied, watching the blur of city lights through the passenger window. In truth, I was trying to understand this feeling, why her presence had started to feel different. Safer somehow. Calmer than most people my age. She nodded slowly, as though she didn't quite believe me but wouldn't push. "You've been helping a lot lately," she added after a pause. "Errands, staying late, being there for a deal. You don't have to carry so much for everyone, you know." Her voice was gentle, but there was weight behind it, like she saw through the surface. That startled me more than I expected. "I guess I don't mind being useful," I said, a half-smile pulling at my lips. That earned a laugh, not the polite kind, but the kind that warmed the air between us. She glanced over, the corner of her mouth softening. "That's a dangerous trait," she said. "People will start depending on you for everything." There was something in the way she said it, a mixture of gratitude and warning, and it made me feel strangely noticed, as if someone finally saw the part of me that usually stayed quiet. The rain picked up, pattering harder against the glass. Inside the car, it felt like a small world. Warm. Contained. Her fingers relaxed slightly on the wheel as the traffic slowed near my street. The conversation drifted, my plans, my work, her week. Nothing dramatic, but I kept catching that occasional glance from her, brief but weighted. And when she laughed again, really laughed, head tilting back just a little, I felt something unspoken stir in the silence that followed. She pulled up outside my building. The wipers slowed, the rain eased into a mist. I thanked her, fingers lingering on the door handle longer than they should have. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a second it felt like the world was just the sound of rain and the warmth of her gaze. "Get some rest," she said quietly. I nodded, stepping out, the cool air biting against the warmth I carried from that car ride, a warmth that wasn't going to leave any time soon. The house was unusually quiet that Saturday afternoon. My friend had gone to pick something up from a nearby store, leaving me there waiting in the living room. I scrolled idly through my phone, half listening to the soft ticking of the wall clock. Somewhere in the kitchen, I heard her moving, light footsteps, the clink of a glass being set down. She stepped in a moment later, wiping her hands on a towel. Her hair was tied loosely today, a few strands falling free to frame her face. She wasn't dressed up, just a simple light sweater and jeans, but there was something about the ease she carried herself with that made everything about her seem intentional, even if it wasn't. "You didn't have to stay," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips as she glanced at the clock. "He won't be long." "It's fine," I replied. "It's quieter here than my place." That made her laugh softly, a polite sound, but one that didn't reach her eyes this time. She crossed her arms lightly and leaned against the door frame. There was a pause, a long one, as if she was deciding whether to say what was on her mind. Then, with a breath that sounded almost like a sigh, she said it. "You should be with girls your age." The words were simple, but they didn't land casually. They carried a weight, not just a statement, but a warning wrapped in care. I looked up at her, surprised not by the words themselves, but by the quiet concern behind them. "Why do you say that?" I asked, my voice even. She shifted her weight, her fingers tightening on the towel in her hands. "Because people your age have their own world, their own mistakes to make, their own kind of chaos to go through. You shouldn't get tangled in something that complicates that." For a moment, I didn't answer. I just watched her, the way her eyes flicked away, then back again, as if testing the distance between us. The rain outside from the other night was gone now, but the same kind of stillness filled the room. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the corner of my mouth tugging just enough to hint at a smile. "But none like you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, yes, but not uncomfortable, more like the air just before a storm, thick with the sense that something has shifted. Her lips parted as if to say something else, but nothing came. She just looked at me, long enough for me to notice the way her fingers finally stopped twisting that towel. Finally, she shook her head, a quiet laugh escaping, not out of amusement, but the kind people let out when they have no words. "You always know how to say things that make everything more complicated," she murmured. I didn't press further. Neither of us did. But from that moment on, the air between us wasn't the same. The days that followed felt like someone had quietly changed the rules without telling me. She was still there, same warm presence, same steady voice, but now there was a thin, deliberate space she seemed to keep between us. Not cold, just careful. When I came by that week, she greeted me at the door with a polite smile. Not distant enough to raise suspicion, but not the same as before. Her eyes met mine, then moved quickly past. She asked about work, about how things had been, but the questions felt rehearsed, like small talk meant to fill the silence rather than break it. I noticed the small details because I was looking for them. How she kept her hands busy when we were in the same room. How her phone suddenly needed checking more often. How, when she passed me a plate at dinner, her fingers barely brushed mine when before they might have lingered, just a second too long to be accidental. It was subtle, but it was there. And strangely, that distance didn't push me away. It pulled me in. One evening, while my friend was upstairs, I found her in the hallway, adjusting a scarf around her neck. It was soft gray, faintly perfumed. I caught the scent as I passed, something delicate, like jasmine after rain. She glanced up, startled for a split second, before composing herself. "Heading out?" I asked, leaning against the wall. "Just for a walk," she said, her voice even, though her fingers fumbled slightly with the scarf. "Clears my head." I nodded, watching the way she tied it, smooth, practiced, but with a hint of restlessness behind the movement. "You've been quieter lately," I said, choosing my words carefully. She froze for a moment, then gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sometimes quiet is better." That was all she said. No explanation, no opening left for more. But her gaze lingered, just for a heartbeat, and in that look there was something unguarded. Tired, maybe? Or conflicted. The rest of the evening went by in small pieces. Her polite laughter at my friend's jokes, the clink of cups being set down, the low murmur of the television we barely watched. But I kept catching her watching me in those in-between moments, the quick glances when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her fingers paused mid-movement if I came too close. Distance, yes. But a distance that wasn't rejection. It was a line she was drawing, perhaps for both our sakes, a line I now couldn't help but see. When I left that night, the air outside was cool, still carrying the faint trace of her perfume on my sleeve where her scarf had brushed against me in passing. I told myself I wouldn't overthink it. But on the walk home, I realized how much quieter everything felt without her there. The evening had settled into that soft, amber kind of stillness that makes everything feel a little more intimate. My friend had stepped out to run a quick errand, leaving me there after we'd all had coffee. She was in the garden, fussing over a small outdoor lamp that had gone out, and I offered to help. She hesitated for a moment, a tiny pause, then nodded. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and cut grass as I crouched near the lamp, checking the wiring. She stood just behind me, holding a flashlight steady, her fingers brushing my shoulder lightly as she leaned closer. It wasn't intentional, I think, but I felt the warmth of it through my shirt. "You don't have to keep fixing things around here, you know," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the breeze. "You're too kind." I smiled without looking up. "I don't mind. It's nice being here." There was a pause, long enough for the night sounds to fill it, the distant hum of a car, the quiet chirping of crickets. When I finally looked up, the flashlight had lowered a little, and she was watching me with that expression I couldn't quite read. Not stern. Not even cautious anymore. Just searching. "Why?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "Why what? Why do you keep showing up? Helping. Staying." Her tone wasn't accusing, more like someone trying to draw a map of something they didn't quite understand. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my jeans. The lamp flickered faintly to life behind me, but neither of us looked at it. My eyes stayed on hers, and in that quiet corner of her garden, words I'd been holding back for weeks finally slipped out. "Because I like being around you," I said. "It feels different." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was gentle, like a soft pressure between us, warm and real. Her breath caught slightly, a small, almost imperceptible sound. She looked down, adjusting the sleeve of her sweater, fingers lingering as though they needed something to do. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, but her voice didn't carry the conviction it once did. "Why not?" I asked softly. "It's the truth." She sighed, a sound that carried more than words could, and stepped a little closer, close enough for her hand to rest lightly on my arm. Not a grip, not even a hold, just a touch that felt like both a warning and a comfort. "You're young," she said. "And I should know better." Her fingers slipped away, leaving behind the ghost of their warmth. We didn't move for a while, just stood there in the dim garden light, the night air cool against skin that still remembered the trace of that moment. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The confession was out there now, quiet, simple, impossible to take back. The night air was cooler than I expected. We stood on the porch beneath the dim glow of the overhead light, that soft yellow that always made everything look warmer than it felt. My friend had already gone inside to grab something he'd forgotten, leaving just the two of us there with the quiet hum of distant traffic and the faint rustle of leaves. She held the door slightly ajar behind her, one hand resting on the frame, the other tugging her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. There was something in the way she looked at me, not quite avoidance, but as if she were holding herself carefully in place, measuring every breath. "You've helped more than enough tonight," she said, a gentle smile curving her lips. "You should get going before it gets too late." "I don't mind late," I replied, my voice low, almost lost in the night air. She exhaled, a small, quiet sound, and stepped forward just enough that we were standing a breath apart. Close, but not crossing anything, not yet. Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence felt like something living between us. "You make things complicated," she murmured, her words barely louder than a whisper. I could have smiled, but I didn't. I just stood there, letting the space speak for me. Her hand lifted slightly, hesitated in the air, then reached up to adjust the collar of my jacket. It was the smallest, simplest gesture, her fingers brushing the fabric, her knuckles grazing my neck. But in that single moment, every nerve felt awake. Her scent was faint, a mix of jasmine and rain from earlier, maybe, or just her. I wasn't sure anymore. My hands stayed at my sides, open, respectful, though my pulse strummed in my chest loud enough I was certain she could feel it in the quiet. "People will talk," she said softly, her fingers lingering a heartbeat too long before slipping away. "Let them," I whispered. That made her look at me, really look. There was something in her gaze that wavered between warning and wanting, a flicker of everything she tried so hard to keep hidden. For a second, her lips parted as if to speak again, but no words came. Instead, she reached out, just for a moment, and let her fingertips rest against my arm. Not a grasp, not a pull, just a touch that said more than anything spoken. We stood like that, two people pretending the world wasn't just on the other side of that door, pretending this was only a pause and not a line being crossed in the quietest way. When the sound of footsteps came from inside, she stepped back, her hand falling away. "Good night," she said, softer than before. "Good night," I echoed, still feeling the ghost of her touch as I stepped into the cool night, the porch light humming behind me like it knew what had just passed. Sunday came with the sky so still it felt like even the air had paused. My friend had invited me over to help him with some work in the garage, but the house was fuller this time. The smell of freshly brewed tea, the sound of the television murmuring from the living room, her quiet presence moving through the halls. When I walked in, she greeted me like she always had, warm but steady, no tremor in her voice, no sign of the night on the porch that still lingered in my chest. There was a calmness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not denial, something else. Something that felt like acceptance. Throughout the day, we existed in the same space but never alone. My friend cracked jokes, asked me to pass him tools, and she floated in and out, offering snacks, pausing by the door to ask if we needed more light. Each time, her gaze found mine brief, unspoken, enough to say, "I remember too." Later, as the sun slanted low and the work wound down, she asked if we wanted tea. My friend waved her off. He was heading out to meet someone. I stayed behind, helping her carry a tray of cups to the living room. It was quiet again, the kind of quiet that carries a heartbeat beneath it. "Thank you," she said softly, setting the tray down. "For helping so much lately. For being here." I shrugged lightly, settling onto the couch across from her. "It's nothing." "No," she said, shaking her head gently, a small smile touching her lips. "It isn't nothing." For a moment, the world seemed to narrow, just the ticking of the wall clock, the smell of cardamom from the tea, the fading gold light catching the edge of her hair. She didn't move closer, and neither did I, but there was no distance left to cross anymore. We had already done that. "I've been thinking," she said after a pause, "about what you said that night." I didn't speak, just waited. She met my eyes, steady now. Life is complicated enough. But some people make it feel less so. You have that effect. The words weren't a promise. They weren't a declaration. They were a door opening, quietly, carefully. I reached for my cup, fingers brushing hers as I did. This time, she didn't pull away. Just a small, deliberate squeeze, nothing more, nothing less, and then we both leaned back, letting the moment settle where it belonged, in the space between us, warm and real. When I left that evening, the porch light hummed above me again, but this time it didn't feel like a threshold to cross, more like a place I already belonged. There was no rush, no need to name what this was becoming. We both understood, some connections don't need to be chased. They just need to be allowed. And as I walked into the cool night, I realized something simple, quiet, undeniable. I wasn't waiting for something to happen anymore. I was already in it.